Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kosciuszko Foundation. My name is Marek Pudlocki, and it is my pleasure to announce that we are celebrating a centennial this year. So as a part of our celebration, we are having a friend of the Kosciuszko Foundation and a two-time scholarship recipient, Professor Tomasz Pudłocki, who will tell you a little bit more about our foundation. I know it's really hard to squeeze 100 years into a 45-minute lecture, but Tomek is a very talented person and he will do it. But let's start it now because he's jet lagged. He just arrived yesterday and he's leaving tomorrow. Yes, appreciation, Tomek, thank you so much. He's working on the history of the Kosciuszko Foundation. I hope the book will be ready sometime next year. No promises at this point. Okay, thank you so much. Tomek, the floor is yours.
Mark, thank you very much for a very nice introduction. Whatever I say about the Kosciuszko Foundation is definitely not enough. I'm standing here today humbled. Why humbled? Because first of all, whenever you try to go through the history of the Kosciuszko Foundation, is the very best example of how the Polish-American, Polish-Polonian organization should be. And maybe in this very point I should just say thank you and should leave. But if you decided to spend with us this 45 minutes, I will try to explain why I strongly believe in this very absolutely unique and fantastic institution. So beyond scholarship, Marek Pudłocki, thank you very much. Ewa Zaborna, thank you very much for making it happen. I'm absolutely speechless to be here after a couple of years, giving you this opportunity to go into the inside of the history. As the President just said, centennial to this very year is a very important point of reference. Why do we celebrate? I think this is a very important question. What is the point of any kind of celebration? Some sob stories or pious hopes? Very often. But I think personally that history is always a challenge, a constant pang of guilt to be better, to do more, much more effectively. And I think this is the history of the Kosciuszko Foundation, this absolutely fantastic mission. A kind of inspiration from the tradition, from the history, to go beyond. And if you'd like to see it, just go through the Kosciuszko Foundation website, what they have been doing, because there is still a process. But first of all, what was done in Warsaw, what happened in Krakow just a few days ago, as a matter of fact, not even weeks ago. We started in the Praha Congress, some of you were here in January, and this fantastic continuation is here with us. So I think, if I would like to say that the Kosciuszko Foundation mission is a part of our life, I'm not here the only one. There are so many people in this very room whose connections, whose history, whose life is so much bonded with the Kosciuszko Foundation. And there are so many perspectives. Each and every one here, in this very room and much more outside, has his or her own perspective. The President's perspective, the staff perspective, the board perspective, the grantees perspective, former and current ones, partners and donors. Without the donors, it's absolutely not impossible to do it. Of course, if we are in New York City, that's definitely the New York City perspective, but what about the chapters? Absolutely important when we are speaking about the mission of the Kosciuszko Foundation. The USA perspective, much more. If you do not believe me, ask Marek how many times he is sometimes willing, sometimes forced to meet with the ambassadors here and there. The Polish perspective, yeah, because still is a fantastic institution on both sides of the oceans. So it's fantastic, amazing, absolutely unique, huge KF family. And each and every one here is a part of this family and a very long tradition, because centenary is not 10 years, it's not 5 years, Look at the current institution in New York City, Polonian institution. How many of them compete the Kosciuszko Foundation? How many foundations and committees were established in 1920s just to do the same job as the Kosciuszko Foundation has been doing for decades? Who's left? Who stayed? And of course, that is why there are so many individual stories. You were using this fantastic staircase. I wish that Mr. and Mrs. Gore are not with us, because you know that the best love story of the Kosciuszko Foundation happened in this very staircase. Ask them, because this is their story and they are living together more than 60 years, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah? So these very stairs are also absolutely crucial. There are many quarrels. If you don't believe me, just ask the staff what is happening here and what was happening also in the past. Disappointments, yes. Not everybody is always willing to stay very, very long. Turning points in this very history of this place and also in the people's life. Elizabeth Kosciuszko said something today that the Kosciuszko Foundation is like a disease. If you're infected, it will stay with you forever. So can we say that is it possible to go beyond Mizwa, so beyond the person who was who invented, who was the founding father, who was the secretary general, director, and finally the president of the Kosciuszko Foundation? 50 years of being here, because let's say the house was built also because of him. Can we say that we are going beyond, or we just repeat what was already happening so many years ago? Can we say that the long shadow is as a legacy is a burden or is it a challenge? Can we say that this is just an idea from the past, or maybe it's a cultural hub? Today we are speaking with Eva Zadvorna that first of all this is the Kosciuszko Foundation as a scholarship center and institution. But are we distributing any scholarship right now? Definitely not. So that is why the house was built, not only for distributing scholarship, not only to organize money, but also to be presented in the very heart of Manhattan, in this very heart of the capital of the world. So definitely, can we say that the Kosciuszko Foundation house is an asset? Or maybe, because it's quite an old house, is a perpetual problem. If you don't believe me, just browse the minutes, browse the history. Each and every president had to face the modernization of the Kosciuszko Foundation house. That is quite costly. So how about the legacy? January 1961. This is the end of the era. Stephen P. Mizwa, after a very long and fantastic life, passed away. There was a new president, a totally new generation, Eugene Kusielewicz, quite a good historian as a matter of fact. He was one among those who was very heavily prepared to take Kosciuszko Foundation into a new decade, so 1970s. The KF House in that time was a gallery of great masters. Look around what we are just see in these fantastic walls. It was a hub for cultural events, a fantastic scientific library and archive, Poland, Polonia, and many, many others. An information center. I was interviewing Mr. Stanley Kuba, who was an assistant to the president in 1970. They had one phone and there was no computer here. So they were asked, they needed to ask so many questions about Poland in 1970s, having only a couple of people as members of the staff. So definitely it was an information center. And of course, the most important part of the mission, a scholarship center. A devoted group of people, definitely Mizwa left a devoted group of people to continue his legacy. I don't know what about the financial background. If I'm not mistaken, the money is very, very good, at least according to the press, what the president is saying to the press officially. There are some members of the board, some trustees are also among us, so ask the people about the money. In 1971, the money was good. definitely was a very good financial background, once again, in this fantastic place in New York City. So what I'm trying to say, it was a very good address in the heart of Manhattan. So that is why such a nice collective photo. Kosciuszko, in the very first row, is resigning. He decided to do something else in his life. A new president was just appointed, Albert or Wojciech Juszczak. A very nice gathering, Christmas party. You know this very famous the Kosciuszko Foundation Christmas parties. But the problem was that it was only for a couple of weeks. This fantastic union split. And what was later? Before coming back to the 70s, I would like to say something more about 1925, because still we are speaking about the centenary. Why the Kosciuszko Foundation was different than the other ideas from that time. Of course, not only the Poles, but everybody was crazy about the statues. How about to erect another statue? To the Kosciuszko, to Kosciuszko, to Pudlocki, to the other heroes. But Stephen Mizwa, when he was a student of Harvard in Boston, Massachusetts, already in 1920 had an idea that the statue is not enough. There were so many statues before. How about to do something else? A kind of a constant join to meet two different spheres, a new Poland and a new America. The old country, which was reborn immediately after the First World War, and the new, absolutely fantastic empire here in this very part of the ocean, so in the USA. So that is why Kosciuszko, the hero of two nations, a person who is a person from the past, very important for the history of this very country, and of course a person who could be a very good example also for the future generations. Constantly, so how? Definitely, in 1920s, Poland was an asset, a kind of phenomenon. How was it possible that after 100 years, more than 100 years, this country came back to the map of the world? It was a bit strange. There were three huge empires, and there are no empires anymore, at least in Europe. But Mizwa was not thinking only about the past. Of course, culture was important, history was important, but Polish territory is crucial. Demography was great in 1920s, definitely. This was not 2000s like today. Business was absolutely flourishing. So maybe we should try to combine this American mentality and materialism. You know that the Europeans were definitely shocked how material stuff was absolutely important for Americans in the 1920s. America was a magnet. So maybe this magnet should be an example for the Poles. Try to combine all these two different spheres. Old Europe, old Poland, and of course new America. What was absolutely important, transparency and the financial support. A colleague of mine, Grażyna Michalski, today showed me a letter from Mr. Gore that she donated a couple of years ago, $500 for the Kosciuszko Foundation. Since the very, very beginning, each and every dollar was transparent. The people got this kind of information. Yes, you paid it. Thank you very much for doing it. So let's say it was also quite new. So from $1 supporters to the locomotive tycoon, like Boldyn Locomotive, one of the most important sponsors of the Polish staff and Polonian staff in 1920s. From the very beginning, Stephen Mizwa, who was a person from today's Podkarpacie, very low background, who was working here very hard, also physically, but who was also studying in American high schools and then colleges. As I said, he was a graduate of Harvard. He decided to cooperate with the best ones. It was not so easy to find the best ones, especially in such a place like New York City. But he was a professor of economics. He was quite persistent. He was trying to best himself each and every year, and years of finding the way finally flourished. Diplomatic circles, scholars, artists, leaders, businessmen, finally they came together in 1925, it happened. What about politics? Mizwa was trying to say who cares about the politics, but do you really believe that it was so easy to be apolitical in Poland after 1926? Definitely not. What about 1945? Definitely not. Many people really cared about politics, with whom the Kosciuszko Foundation was cooperating. So definitely Mizwa, even when he was in his 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s, had to face many challenges. What about Poland under communism? So many Polonian leaders said, no, definitely we shouldn't cooperate with them. But at the very core of the existence of the Kosciuszko Foundation is to building bridges between Poland and America. Whoever is ruling here and whoever is ruling there. If you try to browse the history of the Kosciuszko Foundation from the Second World War and immediately after the war, it's fantastic and absolutely crucial work to rebuild the Polish scientific life. The first exchange programs are absolutely important, especially when they were stopped at the beginning of 1950s. Just 5-6 years. And this generation of young scholars and students really used this opportunity in 1950s and 60s. Even if Poland was closed, even if it wasn't so easy to move after. So what about 1950s, when the programs were closed? The Kosciuszko Foundation needed to find its own way. So the most important mission was stopped. That is why Mizwa, and I think this is also typical for the other presidents, was looking around how to fill the gap, how to find himself and also the Kosciuszko Foundation in new realities, how to survive without Poland. 1963, 1000th anniversary of the Polish baptism is coming. Mizwa is not in a very good shape. He's getting older, but for the very last time, almost after 25 years, he is visiting Poland once again. He was in Poland in August 1939, immediately before the Second World War. He's coming to Poland in 1963. He's so heavily criticized. No, definitely we don't like. So the Polonian leaders, some of them are stressing, no, we shouldn't cooperate with the communism. The communist leaders, this is not us. We should put it aside. We should focus much more on this Polonian young generation who were raised and born already here. But this is not Mizwa. He's trying to prepare the ground for coming back to the main mission. So scholarships. With all respect to Polonia, with all respect to cultural programs, the scholarships are the most important mission for the Kosciuszko Foundation. And his successor, much younger person, he was only 30 in that time, so Eugene Kusielewicz fantastically used this ground which was prepared by his predecessor. So 1970s, extremely various activities here and huge outreach. Can we say that if the president of the Kosciuszko Foundation is present in Poland twice a year, he's speaking with the most prominent politicians. Here you can see in the cover Edward Gierek, who was much more prominent in Poland in 1970s than Gierek. Kusielewicz is always present. He's cooperating with the universities, he's cooperating with the institutions, with the museums, and of course also with the politicians. This is what we would like to have it here in America. Yes, definitely. Poland between 1945 and 1989 it is a communist country. Yes, it was a communist country. That is why we have a very nice files at the IPN archives. Do you think that the presidents could come to Poland without notice, without being spied all the time, without any kind of recordings? You are mistaken. Even Mr. Gore was speaking when he was the president at the 80s, that he was aware that each and every year they were coming, some students were coming, or scholars were coming from Poland, and among them it was a hidden person. But he knew that it was a prize. So the mission was much more important. 1%, 2%, or 3% is nothing when we are speaking about the generations of people coming here and there. Kusielewicz is trying to be as active as possible, because 1970s is the top of the Polish jokes. You know how the stereotypes were painful for the Poles in 1970s. How many of them, how many of you decided to change your surname, decided to leave the Polish milieu because you were so fed up with the jokes present not only in the courtyard, not only in the streets, not only among the friends, but also in the television, in radio. And Kusielewicz is fighting with the stereotypes, showing that the new Poland of 1970s, with the new first secretary, Gierek, speaking French, which was very, very rare in that time, let's say it frankly, is a very modern country. Okay, definitely on the other side of the Iron Curtain, but very nuanced. So that is why so many numerous activities in Poland and in the USA, so many programs, and that is why I can only admire people working here in 1970s being always over-occupied with new duties. If you don't believe me, just browse the archives of the Kosciuszko Foundation from the 1970s. Yeah? Very strong cooperation with the Jagiellonian University, Catholic University of Lublin, Warsaw University, and many, many others. Because Poland of 1970s was opening, was trying to use this opportunity to be much more open to the Western world. Yes, this is still communism, but the reality are in the process of changing. The president of the Kosciuszko Foundation was just president in Krakow, and the president of the Jagiellonian University came back in the history till 1973. Since 1973, summer school of Polish language, history, culture is a constant part of Jagiellonian University curriculum, especially during the summer. This is an old idea from 1930s. Mizwa was doing it in 1930s, but after 40 years, it was possible to renew the idea, and the idea is still here. How many of you was a part of this summer schools? How many fantastic people spent their time in Krakow because of this fantastic cooperation? And of course, since 1970s, new exchange programs for students and scholars. This is what is continued till the very, very day. And if I'm not mistaken, the programs for 2026 are just open, so everybody could apply. The building, as I said, the building is an asset, but it's also a kind of a challenge, always and a constant renovation. So if we are speaking of the history of the Kosciuszko Foundation at the end of 1970s, I'm not surprised that the president could have some health issues, could be overtired, and also some money issues appeared. Especially if the board was a bit reluctant in cooperation with the president. The best situation is when the president and the board are trying to find a balance. But if, let's say, the board or the president are trying to be too pushy, there is always a problem. And definitely it was a problem at the end of 1970s. That is why Albert Juszczak, a new person, was elected president. but unfortunately he couldn't find a proper language with the board. 5 chairmen of the boards. Marek, how many chairmen you have during your term?
Just one.
Just one. And if I'm not mistaken, you're a bit longer president than Albert Juszczak was at the end of 1970s and the beginning of 1980s. Constant quarrels, totally different visions. So either this way or that way. Yeah, so as I said, there are some better and worse moments. Definitely 1980s are very, very hard. If you try to understand what was going on here, we have to remember that one of the most important missions, it was just to exchange professors. Occasionally, some of the Polish professors were asked to come here to give an extensive tours. If I'm not mistaken, there were 4 such cases. 1928, Roman Dybowski, an Anglicist from Krakow University. 1938, Oskar Halecki, a historian from Warsaw University. He never came back. He was planning, he was on the boat to come back, but he never came back to Poland. And without Halecki, we cannot understand the scientific life of so many institutions here in the United States. 1974, the Copernicus celebrations, and the very famous, a very charismatic, but also very sharp Karol Streicher from this very important family of professors from Krakow, historian of art. Whenever you are in the Jagiellonian University, whenever you try to browse the collections of the Jagiellonian University Museum, this is Karol Streicher and his fantastic work. And 1984, a person from Warsaw, one and only Władysław Bartoszewski, and this very picture was taken here in this very room. Albert Juszczak, as a very young president, is just sitting. This is the man with the birds. But of course, also Americans were going to Poland, and we can multiply the examples. I can bore you to death with the examples, but this is not the case of our meeting today. Eric P. Kelly, look at the year. The Kosciuszko Foundation was not even funded, was not even incorporated in 1924. It was just a scholarship committee. But Mizwa is thinking ahead, at least 2-3 steps ahead. That is why he decided to invest money into a very young Anglicist from Dartmouth College, Hanover, New Hampshire. A person who stayed with him for the next 30 years. Mostly, these people were doing research, occasionally extra activities. But I am pointing out the people who were absolutely crucial for the very first decades of the Kosciuszko Foundation. Bartoszewski was lecturing about very important issue of 1980s, so the Polish-Jewish relations. Because of his personal story, he was not only a historian, he was not only a scholar, he was also a time witness. So whatever he was saying, that is why it was so much applauded. Developing the mission. So as I said, 1970s, this is not only the scholarship, this is what was continued heavily since 1950s, so since the collapse of the exchange programs. Conferences, various fields. If you don't believe me, just browse the Kosciuszko Foundation website. How many conferences are organized here in this very room with absolutely amazing people. Some of these people you probably know from the photos. Tadeusz Gromada just passed away. Thinking about good name of Poland. 1930s, it was a quarrel with the Lithuanians. What we can say about Kosciuszko? The Lithuanians were trying to say he was Lithuanian. The Second World War. Copernicus. Can we say that he was purely German? Okay, today we know that he was just in between. He was not purely German, he was definitely not purely Polish, but this is not the case. Definitely, he was not strongly cooperated or connected with the German culture. Polish concentration camps. You know it from your own history. 2010, a huge action led by Alex Storożyński. But can we say that it was only one action in 2010? Definitely not so many others since 2010 when Alex was the president, when Professor Mizwa was the president, and when finally Marek Pudłocki is the president. A constant fight about the proper name. Of course, if we are speaking about different actions, since 1920s, occasionally, the Kosciuszko Foundation was also organizing some competitions about the Polonian roots and legacy. That is why in this very archive of this institution you can find some strange materials from Detroit or from Buffalo. Yeah, because people were sending their documents, their photos, and they were writing something to show, yes, we'd like to donate our personal archives to this very trustworthy organization. Supporting the Polish artists, pianists and singers. Fantastic, amazing history since 1950s. And here we have Krzysztof Penderecki and the wife of one of our most distinguished conductor, so Mrs. Arthur Rodziński. Can we understand the whole fantastic history of the classical music of America without Arthur Rodziński? So as I said, the Kosciuszko Foundation house as the cultural hub, numerous lectures, Christmas parties, meeting with VIP. Look at the picture over here. Agnieszka Holland, Krystyna Janda, and of course, the president, so in this case, Joseph Gore. Some of you were present when I was lecturing here in 2013, and this is our photo, taken so many years ago. Definitely I was a bit slimmer, with much more hair. Sorry guys, I'm also getting older, yeah? Can we say that this is very easy to coordinate this cultural events here? Ask Eva Zatruna, she knows better, definitely she knows better. Speaking about music projects, since the very early 1950s, that is why Witold Małcużyński, one of the very best Polish pianists, having a concert here in this very room with Stephen P. Mizwa and Edward Witkowski, who was the chair of the board all that time. They were cooperating very nicely for the last 20 years. Just immediately after this concert, they split. It was such a huge quarrel. I told you about the quarrels. So sometimes we are cooperating for a very long time. It is not working anymore. Kazimierz Kort, also here 2002, and Wanda Sienko. You knew Wanda probably much better than here than I. Buffalo, because the concerts, the music activities, these are not only here. The Buffalo Symphony Orchestra really wanted to have the Haunted Manor of Stanisław Moniuszko. Buffalo so far away from the Kosciuszko Foundation, and there is a chapter. It was a chapter then, there is a chapter today, and that is why Mr. Gore and the board decided to donate a huge sum of money for the Haunted Manor. I don't know, are you aware that one of the Panufnik's symphony was bought, as a matter of fact, by the Kosciuszko Foundation. So the Kosciuszko Foundation also has its own very nice piece of music. 1966, 1000th year of the Polish baptism. That is why it was ordered from the composer who left Poland and was spending his time in the UK at that time. The Gallery of Great Masters. You know the picture. This is Olga Boznańska, and this is the very moment when this very picture was donated to the Gallery of Great Masters of the Kosciuszko Foundation. The very beginning started at the end of 1920s. It was a very nice collection of Dr. Aleksander Kachanowicz from Brooklyn. He had a huge collection of the memorabilia connected with Tadeusz Kościuszko. It didn't work out. Kochanowicz was in financial trouble. Here he wanted spend it, to give it away. It was not bought by any of the Polonian institutions in 1920s. Since the very late 1940s, it was a constant question: a museum or a gallery? Already during the war and immediately after the war, so many private donors decided to come here and donate, officially and not officially. If you do not believe me about well-known treasures and the hidden treasures, Elizabeth Koszarska is with us. She and Anna Rudek-Śmiechowska and the others are just preparing a new edition, totally new edition of Elizabeth Koszarski book from 1990s. The book is still available. You can just see it. This is absolutely splendid work since 1990s, we definitely needed a new edition, much bigger one, because already since 1990s, new donations have been made, and that is why this is also a very, very vivid center also for the arts. Old and new acquisitions. That is why Mrs. Pudłocki and his donation just a few years ago. Guys, if you are speaking about extra activities, of course there are books. There were so many books sponsored, co-sponsored by the Kosciuszko Foundation. Here you have some examples from 1920s and 30s, and of course also from 2000s. But I would like to underline one book, which was published by the very important person for the Kosciuszko Foundation in 1960s and 70s, so Kazimiera Adrianowska, her memoirs. How she became a very important and successful businesswoman. This is her story. She wrote it when she was in a certain age, let's say it frankly, but this is a very good piece of writing, showing how it was in the New York City since 1914, because she ended up in New York City in 1914, since the very, very late of 1980s. I don't know what about the other trustees, what about the members of the boards. This is also your story. Maybe this is the highest time to say it, to write it. An absolutely important, well-known project. So the dictionary, the old dictionary from 1960s, with Kazimierz Bulas, Thomas and Whitfield. Amazing, absolutely fantastic job done in 1950s, completed in 1960s. And the new dictionary, a praise and absolutely fantastic work done during the term of Mr. Gore. The new version, the digital version, is available since 2017. To do or not to do. The most important or the most problematic event. So the ball. The beginning. Not very good, let's say it frankly. If you think that the Polish diaspora in New York City in 1920s and 30s, even during the Great Depression, had no parties, you are so much mistaken. That is why the Pennsylvania Hotel, and just an average ball, it was nothing extraordinary. Totally, the board needed to totally rethink the whole idea of the ball to make it special among so many Polonian events. That is our world of Astoria. It was not very innovative, let's say it frankly. We can find Polonian balls in the world of Astoria already in 1918. So the place was crucial, but it was not unique. That is why transferring the ballroom into a night in Krakow or in the night in Zakopane, as you can see from the folder, in 1939. An ambassador, the most important pole in this part of the ocean. And that is why here you have Count Jerzy Potocki as a guest of honor of the ball in 1938 and then in 1939. Can we say that it was each and every year? No. First of all, it was a financial challenge. It was a huge organization's challenge. That is why not every year the balls were organized. What about the KF balls today? The plaza. The plaza is the plaza. Should I explain it? I think it's not important. If you try to, this is from the Kosciuszko Foundation website, yeah, so some of you probably know it better than I, because maybe you just wrote it. Patriotic tribute, Polish tradition, networking, fine dining, live music. And if you're a part of the family, a very close part of the family, very famous after parties. I was there only once. Probably this is much your story than this is mine. Because our time is almost over, I would like to draw your attention to the two extraordinary situations in the history of the Kosciuszko Foundation. One is very, very known, of course, this is the Second World War, a huge help for the Polish scholars to rescue them, to send parcels, to send money. In Vilnius, Lviv, today we are speaking about it with Marek Skolimowski and Ambassador Vinit, just to force up why the Kosciuszko Foundation was so crucial during the Second World War. Bringing people to the USA, sometimes through Lisbon, because Lisbon was a place to leave Europe, the very last harbor, either to north or to the south, to creating job opportunities. It was not so easy to find proper jobs for the professors like Rafał Taubenschlag, one of the most important Polish historian and specialist of the Roman law in that time. What about other specialists, chemists, physicists, specialists, etc., etc.? And of course, 1943, Copernicus celebration. And yes, you are absolutely right looking at the slide. This is Albert Einstein, the very one. Albert Einstein being present here with the Kosciuszko Foundation during these celebrations. And as I said, immediately after the war, a new fantastic chapter started, so being a part of the process of rebuilding Poland. Another extraordinary situation is a part of the Kosciuszko Foundation history since the very February 2022. Marek Skolimowski was in that time in Poland, on the very spot. He was a witness, as many of us. I am from the city of Przemyśl, I'm not the only one. So if you are from the border part of Poland, you know what was going on in February and in March. What has been done for Ukraine through the Kosciuszko Foundation, probably know it better. Some of you donated, fantastic. Some of you were very active in this whole process of donation, helping Ukraine, Ukrainian institutions, Ukrainian scholars till this very day. Unfortunately, the history is still on. The war is not over. I promised something for the staff. I don't know who is coming to the Kosciuszko Foundation today. Maybe there are also some caricaturists like Julian Żebrowski in 1970s. He made this sketch of the staff. Yes, because there are so many people behind the picture. Some of them are just volunteers. And this is very often just the beginning of the fantastic story. Stanley Kuba, this very guy, the thin one, this is also his humble beginnings with the Kosciuszko Foundation. Yeah, so definitely from one person, because at the very beginning in 1920s it was only Stephen Mizwa. It was only one secretary in 1930s and 40s, but in 1950s it was not possible anymore. Definitely not. The presidents and the members of the boards, yes, they are absolutely important. But what about the people also who are just behind the role of the first ladies? We cannot understand the history of the Kosciuszko Foundation without Mrs. Mizwa, without Mrs. Kusielewicz, and without Mrs. Gore. Guys, you can like it or not, but these ladies were absolutely important, standing behind and sometimes before their husbands. So there's so many stories, not only the love stories I told you at the very beginning. You know, if you know Mrs. Eugenia, she's definitely the person with character. Yeah? So yes, so all the people behind the picture, the people who prepared this very room for us even today, this is important. And conclusions. Look at this very picture. He's looking ahead. That is why I like this picture of Kosciuszko. He's not walking barefooted. He's not walking on his own. He's on the horse and he's pointing. We need to go ahead. We need to think about the future. Centennial, and what next? Do you think it's enough? Do you think that Mizwa really wanted us to be in this very point and okay, we can go home? Definitely, Mizwa was a charismatic leader, visionary. But I would like to stress that as a matter of fact, each and every president, and I'm not saying it because Marek Pudłocki is here, we know each other quite a while, since 2012, but I would like to say that each and every president, each and every member of the board was carefully chosen, was carefully checked. If you don't believe me, ask Marek how he was asked to say something about himself and his vision. How many candidates were immediately after Juszczak's resign? Mr. Gore had 20 competitors, then 10, finally 3. A couple of months the board needed to find a proper person. Yeah? What I like very much about the Kosciuszko Foundation, the Kosciuszko Foundation is very nicely rooted in tradition and history, but is open to change the past and is open also to new possibilities. Because the cause is essential. And the cause is science, the cause is truth, the cause is America and Poland and building bridges, not divisions. Of course, we are divided. We have different visions, we have different political beliefs, that's very true. But something is much more beyond the politics. And what I'd like to say, many people are around, taking care of the good press, stressing the role of the cooperators. So with all respect to you, Marek, president is important, but without people, he's just one person. So that is why Centennial campaign is absolutely important. Try to be a part of it. And as it was said also in the past, don't forget to donate. Thank you very much.
So I think we have some time for questions. So if you have any questions. Anyone? Okay.
Thank you for a great lecture, fascinating story. You mentioned Professor Gromada, who had been associated with the Kosciuszko Foundation for many years. Do you happen to know how his adventure with the Kosciuszko Foundation began?
Oh, that's a very tough question, as a matter of fact. Okay, I know that Mr. Gromada definitely in 1970s and 80s was crucial. He was also a member of the board. If I am not mistaken, he was among these 20 competitors also to be elected the president. But definitely the board was not so happy to have a scholar anymore. They definitely needed a break of the scholars because Kusielewicz and Juszczak were scholars, and I think it was the highest time to change. So I cannot say what about the beginnings, but I can check my notes and give you some exact answer in the future.
Well, I know the answer.
Oh, you know the answer, okay.
The answer is, well, it's a very nice coincidence because his story is really very ancient. He started when he was 9 or 10 years old, and he danced and sang for the Kosciuszko Foundation. At the very 1939, the night in the Tatra Mountains, in the Tatras ball.
In this very famous
yes,
ball?
Today, I had this catalog in my hands, and I opened it, and I found an invitation to a play, King Sobieski and the Janosik, and among the crew, the cast was Tadeusz Gromada, Jan Gromada, and Aniela Gromada playing the outcasts and their families. So it's really like a great coincidence.
So yeah.
So one more page in your book.
Definitely. So definitely we should be much more careful about the youngsters, not only let's say the adults but also the youngsters. So what about let's say this 10-year-old and what the future brings? I cannot say. Thank you very much for this notion.
I just want to point out, you mentioned the early balls, and my dear wife's father came to this country to get a PhD at Cornell University. He got his PhD in 1930, and he attended one of the early balls. And we used to have his ticket, and it cost $2.
$2. In that time it wasn't so cheap, but I'm a bit surprised that they cost about $2, because if I'm not mistaken, more or less they were $3 or $4 or $5. So $5 seat, it was extremely expensive at that time. I don't know what about today. Can you squeeze in having only $5 or $2? I think we can ask the president or the vice president somehow. Yeah, but definitely. So what I would like to stress, I know what about today, how many members of the staff are engaged in organizing the balls, but in that time it was all pro publico, yeah, so pro publico bono. So Mizwa was responsible to find people who would be engaged in organizing the ball. Okay, for himself alone it was just impossible, so that is why Edward Witkowski was a crucial person. Edward Witkowski was a person who had the very first Polish travel agency, a very good cooperator of Ignacy Jan Paderewski, a person who was the president of the Manhattan Society. And Manhattan Society was Americans' organization of the Poles, definitely addressed for Americans. And he had a very nice experience with organizing the balls on both sides of the river, so here and also in New Jersey. That is why they started cooperating. And it was a success. So as I said, the first ball was not very successful. The Kosciuszko Foundation needed to pay some extra, but since the second ball, it was profitable. But the whole organization committee, it was a huge, it is like 60 or 70 people. Yeah, so I don't know what about today. Do you have 60 or 70 people on board organizing the ball? But definitely in that time, it was like that. No.
Question? Okay, so I have a question. From what you said, it's in the 70s and 80s, it looked like the Kosciuszko Foundation was a crossroad, in a sense, difficult crossroad. Was the reason for that was the people, the presidents, or the situation? In the back, political situation in Poland in the early 80s.
I think mostly it was the problem of the people. So first of all, Kusielewicz was a very good president at the beginning. So I think that the first 5 or 6 years it was very, very successful. But he was spending so much money on different projects. So all of a sudden, this very nice budget since 1971 was disappearing, in the process of disappearing. Some of the Polonian leaders were very disappointed with his heavy cooperation with the communist regime and communist universities. So many donors just withdraw. So that is why money was in this case crucial. Of course, the economic situation was also important. You know that New York City is not very easy to live. How much taxes you pay, you know it better than myself. So the people were complaining that earnings here were definitely not enough for paying taxes. So that is why the board needed to find a new solution, financial solutions. And if Kusielewicz was organizing so many activities in the States and in Poland, he was I can only admire him and his wife, how they were doing in 1970s. So I think it was a bit too much, definitely too much. We can find in the archives that there was a not so nice conversation, okay, letters in this case, that's why we know it, between him and the chairman. So definitely the chairman was not very active in that time. Kosciuszko was saying, with all respect, I am not a professor of economics, I am a professor of history. Maybe you should be much more careful with the money. Where is the board? Where are the trustees? Why I'm left alone? Especially the renovation of the house, which cost a fortune, definitely cost a fortune. Albert Juszczak was full of enthusiasm, definitely a young person, very nice, and very open. Once again, he was trying to continue these many activities here. But once again, so many people were not satisfied with the cooperation with Poland at that time. So as I said, this process of withdrawing money from the Kosciuszko Foundation continued. The quarrels with the board, definitely we can find it. Each and every year, it was a new chairman. Finally, Leslie Burgess decided to take over, but he took over so heavily that he changed the president. So, you know, I think people are important, but of course, as you know better, money is also essential. Without money, and so this fantastic balance between the people and money, you cannot run the foundation. And you know it better than I.
More questions?
I think that, and I say this as someone who was a recipient of a Kosciuszko Foundation grant in 1973, that your description, to a certain extent, glosses over the purposes and intents of the summer programs, which were definitely used to attempt to inculcate a specific understanding of Polish history, i.e. a socialist, communist understanding of pre-war Polish history. And it certainly was something that I was subject to when I arrived in Warsaw and were instructed to go to Dom Polonia, and we had to meet with the director. And after our initial interchange, I was never asked to return to the building because I didn't accept the statements of emigracja za chlebem, kiedy potrzebował kraj, potrzebował, to wybrali własne dobro ekonomiczne, a nie naród. That cannot be glossed over, and especially what was done in Krakow at the Young Polonian was taking very malleable teenagers and manipulating them, and that shouldn't be glossed over. And Kosciuszko had to be aware of that. And that was part of what created that tremendous controversy in Polonia in general and criticism of him. So that, I would hope you would consider revising your statements on that.
That's very true, but can we say that in 1970s it was possible otherwise? So many of the people living here, they had no contacts with Poland. So the Poland was just a very distant past. The new generation born already in the USA, if they had any contact with Poland, so there were the Polish districts. It was a very ethnic Polish district, not Poland of 1970s, and the Poland of 1970s was also in the process of changing. I'm not saying that it was not a propaganda, but with all respect, propaganda is even today. If you don't believe me, just go and find some news this way or another way. I'm not trying to justify the people who were in charge of organizing the summer programs, because probably they were very carefully chosen. I'm totally aware of it. Especially at the very, very beginning, 1973, 74, these people were a kind of, on the very first row between the communist regime, who was making a kind of a step towards the institution here. But without a compromise, it wouldn't be possible at all. So either a kind of compromise, thinking that maybe, I don't know, in 2, 5, 10 years it would be better, or it wouldn't be a problem, it would have been anything at all. So yes, thank you very much for this notion. You know it from your own perspective, and your perspective is absolutely important. But I think, let's say, the people were thinking about the future. So sometimes, even if we are not doing things perfectly, maybe we can just make a statement, and I don't know, there will be others who would do it much better, I don't know, in a day or in 2 days' time.
Okay, looks like there are no more questions.
More questions,
Okay.
yes. The foundation during the 80s, when we were still communist, you had the solidarity movement. How did the foundation stay afloat? Where were their, where were their funds coming from? Did you have that kind of support here at that time?
Okay, so when we are thinking about 1980s, so more or less the first 5 years was under the presidency of Albert Juszczak. The second part was under the presidency of Joseph Gore. There were two different ways of leadership. So as I said, Albert Juszczak, much younger person, I think very enthusiastic. Okay, I was not supposed to say it, okay, but I will tell it. So Albert at the very, very beginning was very, very strongly dedicated to the Kosciuszko Foundation, but then he also was doing some extra stuff, so like seances, he was into kind of the mediums. Some people were living here, so it's another hidden or maybe not so hidden story, that people were literally during his term living here. So that is why also these cases with the boards, that some members of the board, especially those who were raised and prepared by Mizwa, or let's say early Kosciuszko, they just couldn't believe it. What was going on here in this very house? I said to you that the Kosciuszko Foundation renovation was made during the Kosciuszko, and this is true. Somehow, just within a couple of years, almost everything was neglected. So when Mr. Gore became the president, he needed to start the renovation from the very beginning. Once again, a huge sum of money. You're speaking about solidarity. So first of all, the presidents were not so they tried to find a balance between the government, so the communistic government, because without the permission, nobody could come here, not even a single American would go to Poland. Let's say it frankly. So as I said during my speech, Mr. Gore was aware that each and every year it was also a hidden person from Poland sent here, infiltrating situation, but it was also a price he needed to pay. And I think Juszczak was also aware of it. We have very good materials in the IPN archives, how the presidents, each and every time coming to Poland, were infiltrated, who was accompanying them why it was so problematic. So that is why I think the Kosciuszko Foundation, when you are speaking about the solidarity, was trying to find a proper balance. Not very open, was not very open, supportive in this case, but once again, it was also a political movement.
Neutral, try to be neutral.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very for the perspective and you come about the whole history of
Speak up.
So thank you for the history of the scholarships and the Kosciuszko Foundation. So I wanted to ask you what's the strategy for the future? We talked about a lot about the past. What's the strategy, especially for the scholarships for the future, for using them to maybe go beyond heritage, beyond this kind of like a heritage tour, maybe using those money, those scholarships to bridge the gaps in forward-looking sectors like tech, like space industry, bringing together young people from the US and from Poland. There's wonderful things going on in Poland. Like, why not at least try to use that vehicle to team up with young people who have ideas and they could do things together. Is there a strategy to try to do that?
I think that's the question.
Definitely, this is the question for the president.
Yeah. he's a historian, okay? So I'm not sure he will be able to answer that question. Yeah, thank you, very interesting. Of course, we are in a sense limited within our mission, so we cannot go too far. But as you said, Poland has been changing and it's developing tremendously. We just came back from Poland, almost entire board, we celebrated a centennial, and we are trying to find new ways to face the problems or challenges, opportunities that you mentioned. Exactly, yeah, we are, of course, the biggest challenge is to keep the younger generation closer to the foundation. That's absolutely, it's been like this for decades. It's the same problem probably Tomek can read in the 70s, 80s, and a couple of presidents were fired for that. But definitely we are trying to find new ways to work with Poland. It's a completely different world like in the 80s or early 90s. Poland is a partner right now. So Poland doesn't need the same money they needed in the 90s, 80s, or 70s. So we are even trying to start a fundraising campaign at some point in Poland. Probably a corporate campaign more, not a personal one, but that's one of the options. And to work closer with professionals, that's what you mentioned. Yeah, so that's why we met like Polska Rada Biznesu in Poland, American Chamber of Commerce, these people, just to discuss these opportunities. It's absolutely, yes, that's ahead of us as the Poland is changing. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so Tomek, thank you so much. We still can continue talking about the Kosciuszko Foundation downstairs with a glass of wine. So you are invited downstairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much.